Hello. In this math video, I will do a GED math video regarding evaluating functions. So go ahead and get out your notebook because we are going to go over some notes. So yeah, so let's go over some notes. So let's first kind of review some of the stuff we went over. So a little bit of a review. The linear equation. So you've probably seen this many times before, but I'm going to repeat again. Linear function or linear equation is in the form of y equals mx plus b. Okay. The second one is the quadratic, which is the form of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. The keynote is if the power is 2, that's how you know you're dealing with a quadratic. Okay. And then there's some key terms you need to know about. When you're evaluating functions, you must know what the word input. So input is something you put inside the function and it's usually next value. So yeah, it could be input could be in a letter and a number as well, but most likely it's just an X value. So input is, okay. And then output is something the function spits out. Uh, it's something after you put, it's what you, it's what it spits out after you put the input. So it's usually a Y value. So yeah, so those are a review. So linear function is y equals mx plus b. Quadratic is in the form of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So if you see anything with power 2, that's how you know you're dealing with quadratics. Input is something you put inside the functions. It's usually an x value, but it can also be a letter and a number. For example, you could put x minus 2 inside the function, right? But usually it's usually a number, an x value, right? Output is something that the function spits out. So wait, let me show you. For example, if your function was f of x, let's make this really simple, 3x plus 1, right? And an example of an input is something you put inside the function. So for example, f of 2. 2 would be the input and it's an x value. And what you're really doing is wherever you see an x, you're going to replace that with that value 2. Okay? So that's an example of an input. And then an output is something the function spits out, and it's usually the y value. So for example, when you plug in 2, f of 2 into that same function, and you simplify this, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1, that is 7. Your output is that 7. Okay, so go ahead and copy, because I am going to do the first problem. Good. Okay, clear. First problem. So question 1, the function f of x f of x equals 5x plus 3 represents the total numbers of books in a bookstore with x shelves. What is the total number of books in the bookstore with 4 shelves? So you got to ask yourself, that 4, is that an input or an output? So is 4, is that an input or output? 4 is technically an input. It's an x value, right? Once you know that, then you got to ask yourself, uh, then you're gonna find they're probably asking for the output. Okay, so the question is asking for an output or a y value. Okay, so here's our function, f of x equals 5x plus 3, right? And we're gonna plug in, so x, believe it or not, is the number of shelves, right? Number of shelves. And in our case, our x value is 4. And then y is the output, but what is it really? What is it really? It's going to be the number of books. Okay. So that's very helpful when you do these problems. Figure out what is technically your x value like in words, and then plug in the value, and then what is your y value in words, and then figure out um, algebraically what the number is, right? So here we go. So we said our x or our input is 4, so you're going to plug in 4 into the function. So where we've seen x, plug in 4, so this is 5. And because this is squished, see how it's really adjacent? That means multiplication. So if you see anything that's squished, that literally means multiplication. So it's going to be 5 times 4 plus 3. And then 5 times 4 is 20 plus 3. And 20 plus 3 is 23. So 23 is your output. But in words, what does that really mean? What does that 23 in words represent? So you can write this you don't have to write this, your answer is 23, but if you're curious how to answer this in a complete sentence, um, I guess you could say if you put a bookstore with 4 shelves, will give you 23 books. Right? So this is how you say it in a complete sentence. I know they're not asking you, but it's good to know, right? So yeah, your correct answer is D, 23. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to question 2. So consider the function f of x equals 2/5 x minus 9. Find x when f of x equals 5. Okay, so this is no longer a word problem, right? They're not using much words, right? They give you a function. If you want, you can rewrite this function as, do you see the letter x? You can literally put that in the center or on the top. So if you want to, if you're very dyslexic, you could put that x on the top, but never on the bottom, right? So you could put your letter on the center or on the top, but never on the bottom. It's really preference. Some people prefer center, some prefer on the numerator. Okay, now they're asking you, they tell you this, find x. So what we're trying to find is an x value or an input. Uh, when f of x is 5. So what is this? This is can be a bit confusing. What does this f of x equals 5? What does that really represent? So this is what's called your output, believe it or not. And it's a y value, right? So it's kind of going backwards from the other problems. we're given an input and we got to figure out the output. Now it's going backwards. So did you know that f of x, so if you ever see an f of x, g of x, h of x, etc., you know what that really means. It's in a y value or in an output. So wherever you see an f of x, a g of x, or an h of x, they all mean the same thing, y. So what I'm going to do is replace this f of x with 5. And then what I'm going to do is they want to know what the x value is, so we got to solve for x. So what we could do is there's two things we can do. We can get rid of the fraction immediately by multiplying all three sides by the LCD, right? Because there's three sides. Or what you could do is move this -9 to the left by adding 9 to both sides. So this zeroes out. So now you're left with, on the right side, you're left with 2x over 5. And then on the left, what's 9 plus 5? 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, 14 or 14 over 1. Now, because you only have two sides, right? You have the left and the right. You may cross multiply, right? So remember, cross multiplying only works if you only have two sides. It will not work if you have three or four, right? So I'm going to cross multiply. So it's going to be 14 times 5 equals, and then I see this is why I put that invisible one, because what's 1 times 2x? 2x. And then with the calculator, what is 14 times 5? So you can use a calculator sometimes. So 14 times 5 is 70. And then solve for x by dividing both sides by 2. And then what's 70 divided by 2? 35. Okay, so my answer is 35. Okay, so that was that one. Let's continue to the third last one. So on the third one, oh, this is confusing. Not really. Consider the function f of x equals x squared minus 3x minus 10. Complete the table. Oh, I see. Okay, so okay. They give you a function and they actually give you inputs or x values. They give you several more than one x values, believe it or not. So they give you an x value of -1, 0, and 2, right? These are all x values. What we got to do is figure out the correct output when we plug in these x values. So let's do that real quick. So here's our function f of x equals x squared minus 3x minus 10, right? What kind of function is this? This is a quadratic because the power is 2. So let's figure out what the output when the x value is -1. So let's try -1 first. So wherever you see an x, plug in -1. And I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to use parentheses. So over here, this is where a lot of people can make mistakes. They don't put parentheses and they just put -1 to the power 2. And then when they put that in the calculator, it does give you -1. That's false. It should be +1. So when in doubt, always use parentheses. So I'm going to do parentheses and then -1 and then power 2 and then -3 parentheses -1 minus 10. So if you want, you could put all this in the calculator. If you put it exactly like this in the calculator, you're fine. Make sure you put the parentheses, right? But without a calculator, -1 square is +1, not -1. -3 times -1 is +3, and then minus 10. And when you put it all together, what's 1 plus 3? 4. And then minus 10. That is -6. Okay, so one of our output is -6. Now let's keep on going. So there's two more x values, two more. So let's plug in 0. So wherever you see next, plug in 0. So it's going to be 0 squared minus 3 times 0 minus 10. This is 0 squared is 0, -3 times 0 is 0, and then you're left with -10. Okay, and then lastly, let's plug in 2. So it's going to be parentheses 2 squared minus 3 times 2 minus 10. So 2 squared is 4. -3 times 2 is -6 minus 10. So if you put that in the calculator form, -6 minus 10 is -12. Okay, so those are your outputs. So it's going to be -6, -10, -12. So it looks like I think it's option B, right? -6, -10, and -12. Yep, letter B, option B. Okay, so that is your answer. So this is evaluating function and figuring out what is an input and output. Okay, let's check our work. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to stop here.